hope that goes right. Okay. All right. Okay. So if you don't mind, I'm going to actually introduce you.
Okay.
Oh, Chris, did you want me to go over to the other meeting then? Is that what I need to do?
You can introduce. Yeah, never mind. Sorry.
I'm happy to introduce. I was trying to get everyone in here.
Okay. All right. Good luck.
All right. So are you heading over to the other meeting for Sue? Because some people have said they were having trouble getting in.
I will go check in the main room, I think.
Okay. All right, so good afternoon. I'm just going to introduce our session on project-based learning. Kim Peterson has been an instructor in high school math and science courses and is currently an instructional designer and coach at Calgary Academy. And Neil Frail is a high school math and science teacher at Calgary Academy. And I think you guys are our farthest away presenters this year.
Yeah, maybe so.
Last year we had a presenter from London, which was fun.
I think this is one of those positive outcomes of the COVID situation.
Right. We've been able to bring in a lot of people that in other years we would, I mean, I don't, if you saw John McClain's speech, he's in Nashville. He's not normally going to come and be able to do a presentation for us. Dr. Shakashiri and Jerry Bell, you know, one's in Washington, D.C., one's in Wisconsin. Like, we would never be able to have people from Calgary. We have a presenter coming in from Texas tomorrow. We had a presenter from Georgia this morning. We can't do these things when it's a strictly regional setting. So it's wonderful that we get all this variety.
Absolutely. Okay, should we go ahead and get started?
I agree. We are recording, so we're good to go on that set. And if I pop out, it's just so I can go check on the people in the other room and make sure they're not like lost.
Okay, sounds good. I'll go ahead and share my screen and then get started with the presentation. Neil, you're going to tell me when everything goes horribly wrong?
You'll be the first to know.
Okay, good. Are you seeing my chat window and everything right now? Okay, then I need to do that a different way.
Actually, no, we're just seeing your PowerPoint.
Do you see a weird rectangle to the left or to the right though, where my chat window would be?
No.
Excellent. Okay. I was practicing this earlier and finding some strange things depending on how I shared things. All right, so welcome everybody. We're here to speak with you today about our experiences with project-based learning and what we tried in a grade 12 chemistry class. We've done a couple of times now, just for fun. we've made things a little bit complicated in that we've actually kind of switched jobs since we signed up for this session. So I was the instructional designer and coach, and Neil was the teacher. And now I'm taking on a new teaching role within the school, and Neil has taken over my role, my old role as instructional designer and coach. So we just combined it.
Yes, that way.
Yeah. And we're both out of, we work at Calgary Academy, which is in Calgary, Alberta. Our school is a K-12 school, primarily for students with some sort of learning challenge. But average to above average intelligence, however you measure that. And so really bright kids who are just not getting their needs met in their current setting. And so that's where our school comes in. So what we really wanted to do to start with is to get everybody on a common ground and a common understanding of what project-based learning is before we talk about how we designed our project and what that ended up looking like. Because I found when I've done research trying to find some great ideas that are already out there that people have shared with everyone, I've really seen quite a range. And so some things will be called project-based learning, but when you look at it, it's mostly just a worksheet. Other things have lots of good elements in them, but are lacking some of the things that would be considered the gold standard PBL, which is what we'll be focusing on. And then there's some really amazing things out there that have all the elements in it. So we just wanted to make sure that we were clear on what we were talking about when we were talking about gold standard project-based learning, recognizing that there may be experts in here and there may be people who've never even tried it. They've just heard about it and are not even really sure where you would start, or not even sure if it has a place in high school, because I know that was me 5 years ago. So in bold there is sort of the official definition. It's a teaching method in which students learn by actively engaging in real world and personally meaningful projects. And that definition is from the pblworks.org website. We'll definitely put that in the chat at the end again, because pretty much anything you need to try something, just dip your toe into project-based learning, you can find on that website. And we do follow PBL Works gold standard for project-based learning at our school. But the main idea is students are learning all of the curriculum outcomes through the course of the project. So it's not, that we teach all of the stuff that they need to know, and then we do a project at the end to consolidate learning or to extend student understanding and take them beyond the curriculum. Those things definitely have a lot of value, but this is just different. Something that's project-based learning is actually the curriculum outcomes being taught through that project. And typically you're focusing on real world problems, answering complex questions, something that is going to be very engaging for the students. And often if you can find something that's rather current, that's very helpful when you're trying to do that. So why project-based learning? This is definitely not an exhaustive list. It's the ones that we've definitely come across though quite a bit. So the first one there kind of leads into a lot of the other ones. Learning the outcomes through an authentic context really makes it matter. It makes it meaningful to our students. And in doing that, it increases their engagement. So, I've done a lot of traditional teaching in my days where I've taught the lessons and they've kind of been in silos. And maybe I link to something interesting in the real world. But when the students are looking at a big picture problem they want to solve, and along the way, they're learning the bits that they need to ultimately be able to truly understand how they could come up with a solution, it makes it more meaningful. We definitely in project-based learning, if it's well designed, we don't get the where will I ever use this, because they actually see a purpose for their learning. And I know for me personally, that's become more of an issue as you get into higher level grades in high school, especially things like grade 12 math, especially the what we call math 30-1 here, which is university entrance for math programs. A lot of it is very abstract. And so students are often asking that question of where will I ever use this? And so when you give them a project that gives the real world applications, it just brings it all to life, and it brings them into deeper learning automatically. Because when they have to take their learning and apply it to a real world scenario or a real data set that they found online or that we provided for them, that gets them to a deeper level of understanding, because it's a lot harder to do that. Real world data it's not perfect, right? So that requires some other decision making that needs to come into play. Making lots of community connections, and we definitely will share some with you today that we made through this project specifically. There's definitely research on the increased student achievement that comes out of this. We sort of did our own work on that, very low level, because we're not researchers. But if you want to read some research, again, there's some great stuff on pblworks.org. And then that last bullet is really, really important, because this is where we really sort of flip our priority. The emphasis on all of those skills that are really important for post-secondary and for life, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, problem solving, organization, time management, decision-making, all of those things become a big focus of the learning rather than something that is an aside or maybe you'll get a chance to tack on later. So again, borrowed from the website, none of this is mine at this point, I should be very clear, from pblworks.org, formerly the Buck Institute. These are the design elements for gold standard project-based learning. And we're going to go through them in a very high level overview. But if you have any questions at the end, or if you want to talk to us afterwards, we're happy to do that, to go into more detail with them. What I really want to draw your attention to right off the bat, though, is that at the heart of everything is the knowledge, the skills, the understandings that you need your students to have that are coming from the curriculum and from those critical competencies that you want students to have, like critical thinking skills. It's not, sometimes people worry that to design a really engaging project, you sacrifice some of the curriculum content. And that's not it at all. Actually, you should always start with the curriculum content. What do my students need to be able to know and do by the end of this experience? And then building the activity, the experience around that. So that's one thing that is sort of at the heart of everything we do with project-based learning. And then as you can see, there's 7 other design elements around the outside. And I'll just again, briefly explain each of them. We'll pause if anybody wants to ask any questions after that, and then we'll move into what we did specifically in our project and how it ties to each of these design elements. So the first thing is, once you've got those curriculum outcomes and those key skills you want your students to achieve during this project, or at least work on, because we're always a work in progress, right? Then you need to come up with a challenging problem or a question, something that frames all of the learning that they're about to do. And it doesn't need to be a whole unit. It can be a part of a unit, a section of a unit. I've seen / heard of teachers doing an entire year. That seems that's outside of my comfort zone for sure. But having that big problem that drives all of the learning. And then once you have that, you need to always have sustained inquiry throughout the project. So starting with launching that question, to having the students ask questions as they're going, and recognizing that as they learn more, it actually gives us new questions that are generated from that learning. Authenticity is really important. Some sort of real world context, tying this to something that matters. It can be a current issue. It can be something that is, personal concerns that the students have, or interests. You can make some things very open-ended and let them choose what really speaks to them, but still ties to the curriculum. And there are ways of allowing a lot of freedom, but also being clear on what your expectations are, and still ensuring that they all meet the curriculum outcomes. Student voice and choice, as much as is appropriate for that project and for that course. But as much, again, as you can let the students make decisions about what it is they're going to learn or how they're going to learn it, it really does impact their buy-in and their interest of what it is that they're doing. Giving them some ownership over their learning is really important. There should be opportunities for reflection all the way through for students and for the teachers that are involved. I know Neil and I were regularly course correcting. This project we're going to share with you, we did twice. And very different circumstances both times. And, we have to model for kids the fact that it's okay to reflect on what you're doing, acknowledge that, wow, that didn't work. What can we do different? And bring the kids along on the journey with you. There's actually something really interesting that happens in terms of the connection between the teacher and the students when the teacher actually has the vulnerability to say, okay, that didn't go as I had expected. What do you guys think? What could we do now to fix this? What should we do next? It really empowers the kids, and again, makes them feel like it's more of a partnership rather than somebody with the knowledge conveying that knowledge to the students who are the receivers, the passive receivers. Opportunities for critique and revision, and not just feedback, but feedback along the way with the opportunity to take action with that feedback. Feedback at the end, there's a lot of research that shows students very rarely even bother to read it because they can't do anything with it in that moment. But feedback along the way allows students to reflect on their learning a little bit as well. It ties into the reflection, but then actually improve their final product with that meaningful feedback that they're getting. And finally, some sort of public product. And that can look all sorts of different ways. It can be presentations. It can be, like a fair where you have people walking around and asking students about their work. It can be videos that students have recorded on something like Flipgrid, or, it can be letters. We had a project this year at our school where the grade 6s wrote letters to some members of, different levels of politics to express their concerns about issues. So lots of different ways of making their learning public, but that audience is what really gives an authenticity to learning that the students did, and really makes them feel valued in what it is that they did along the way. So I'm going to stop there for a second and just see if there are any questions that have come up, or if we're good to move on.
Okay. Well, if there's no questions, I'll give a brief introduction to where our inspiration for our project came from. So in the summer of 2019, this news story came out in Calgary that we were sending 2,000 tons of plastic clamshell containers to the dump. And the clamshell containers are, the ones you often get salads in them, or the croissants at the bakery come in them, and use them once and you immediately throw them out. And what had happened was the city had a large amount of these for reasons that we don't really need to get into, but they stored them in multiple semi-trailers for a very long time, realized they couldn't sell them off, so sent them to the dump. And we kind of looked at this and thought, wow, there's many things wrong with that, but there's a learning opportunity here that we can take advantage of and tie it into our grade 12 organic chemistry unit.
Yeah, and at 2,000 tons, I think about how light those plastic containers are.
Yeah.
2,000 tons, I can't even fully wrap my head around just how much plastic would have been in that. So then, as I said, we always start with the outcomes and our goals for the students when we're designing projects. So we saw that and thought, wow, like that matters. We need to talk to our students about that. That's their landfill and they're inheriting that from us, whether they like it or not. So we started with the general content outcomes, and you can see them there. They're very big. There's a lot of bullet points underneath those, but the basics of basically it's an introduction to organic chemistry, organic compounds, naming and drawing and building, and recognizing the chemical reactions of those outcomes, or sorry, of those organic compounds, and how we get the building blocks for these things out of crude oil. And crude oil is a major industry here in Alberta, so very relevant for us. And it's definitely a divisive one. But also looking at the way we can use reactions to create polymers. And that's a big part of our curriculum too. But Neil and I, when we were talking about this earlier, is like those two things, those big content outcomes were always our focus. And I should say we do have a provincial exam at the end of this course. So we always had that pressure of, we all feel when there's those external achievement exams that we've got to make sure they have the content that they need to be successful on that. And then upon reflection of this, we've realized that they don't always do well. Even if they've got the content, they don't always do well on those questions. And it's because the questions are really well done. Like our diploma exam questions are all application questions. And so we were kind of missing the mark on that. When we looked at the skills outcomes, and these outcomes are actually explicitly in our chemistry, our grade 12 chemistry curriculum. Actually, these same skills outcomes are in our science curriculum from grade 1 all the way up to grade 12. But they very nicely tied our project into this, our new way of teaching this. So, developing to meet societal needs, historical development we were able to get into because we're changing as we go with this. The intended and unintended consequences for humans and the environment. Yeah, right. Like we made plastic containers because they're an easy way to package and store and sell this, say fruit, but the unintended consequences for the environment are massive. Formulating questions about observed relationships and planning investigations, working collaboratively in addressing problems, and communicating information and ideas and assessing results. All of that is actually overtly in our curriculum. But to be honest, before we really focused on the general content outcomes, the knowledge the kids needed to have, and the skills outcomes maybe happened. Like maybe we brushed on them a little bit. And what we did was we switched our focus. We started focusing on those skills, because that's at the heart of the PBL, the things that we really need them to be able to do, these life skills that are going to endure beyond our classroom and will make them better problem solvers and critical thinkers on those diploma exam questions, without sacrificing the content outcomes. We still covered them all, but we covered them in a different way. It switched our approach. It made it so that we were covering them in a more applied way rather than a very, direct instruction. Here's some content that I have, and you're going to passively absorb that from me. It was very different. And it doesn't mean that we didn't do some direct instruction. There's always a place for that. But it just means that our focus was different, and switching that focus made it a much better learning experience for our students and for us.
So our driving question for the project was, what can we do about the problem of plastics in our local landfills? And right there, that's a very broad question. We weren't just focusing in on the clamshell plastics, the 2,000 tons specifically. We just kind of used that as a jumping off point for what became a much larger conversation, a much bigger picture. We get into it later, but students very quickly realize, wow, how much of this stuff actually isn't recycled. I put it in the recycling bin and I feel great about myself, and then it ends up going to the landfill anyway because this plastic is not being recycled. So this opened up a wide range of possibilities and conversations for the students to have with one another. And as we'll see, kind of going through our project, several students went in several different directions, which is what we would hope. And what we would expect out of something like this would be that the students don't go through a very narrow linear path to try to answer this question, try to come up with a good solution to this question. Is that the world's their oyster. They can really run with it and dig into it and figure out something that is engaging and meaningful to them, but will also be kind of an exciting and interesting presentation, hopefully at the end.
So the next element in terms of the design element was that sustained inquiry. So we started by that driving question being introduced. We had that launching video that we shared with the students, got them talking about that. And then we captured their need to know questions at the start of the lessons. And so what that means is, here's our big question. What do we need to know to be able to answer that question? And getting students to just, what are big questions, small questions, what are they? And, when you're in person, that can take the look of sticky notes the students are putting up on the board, or, a whiteboard they can write on. The first time we did this project, we were fully online. And so in that case, we used a different channel in Teams where the students could all write in their need to know questions, and then regularly going back to them, giving them the opportunity to acknowledge the ones they felt like they've learned now. And we had them put a thumbs up on those ones that they felt good about now, and then add to it. What did this learning now make you wonder more about? And then working through that so that the student questioning was actually driving the learning. And they do go in the direction you need them to. And if they don't, we figured out pretty quickly ways that we could throw questions in there that the students were like, oh, yeah, that's great. And so, as long as you're an active participant, you can still have some control over making sure that they are going the way you need them to cover the curriculum outcomes. And yeah, we just kept on adding things in as we went, and asking more questions as we go. And it's very inquiry driven.
For the authenticity portion of it, as Kim brought up earlier, it was so important for us to make this a local problem or a local conversation for the students. And it was actually kind of funny. On more than one occasion, we had to kind of pull them back in because they said, oh, and then we can, do you know how many plastics are in Alberta and then across Canada, and then we can start solving plastic. Okay, just breathe. But it gets the students very, very interested in starting at the point of their local landfill. They've definitely thrown one of those containers into the recycling bin, so it's tangible for them. It involves the major industry in Alberta, crude oil refining, and that ties in really nicely with the curriculum and with the actual source of these plastics, the polymerization reactions, and that's where some of the more direct instruction got sprinkled into the project, was actually discussing, okay, what is an addition reaction? What is a condensation reaction? And things like that to actually break down the science for the students, so they can think in the background of, okay, these plastics, these containers, how are they actually being produced? The end product for our students was to create a proposal for Calgary City Council, with the potential solution being a real task. So we had our city councilor for our ward in the city come into our presentation, and we had different people from our school community, administration, different researchers, different teachers come in, and the students presented their proposal on how they were going to solve the plastic problems in Calgary landfills to this panel of city council. And yeah, we had our actual counselor. He actually came in before the main presentation day, and he had kind of a Q&A with the students, which is incredibly valuable. Just the questions that they had for him, and kind of him telling them what makes a good presentation, what makes a bad presentation, what's an engaging one, what's a boring one. And just it became so real and tangible for the students once they, you know, kind of wrap their heads around the fact that they are presenting this to not just myself and Kim, but people outside of our little chemistry bubble.
Yeah, and we also, you know, we didn't make the slide, but we tried to do a field trip to the local landfill. There is a good education program there, but during COVID, obviously there were no field trips, so that didn't end up happening. And but we were able, and they wouldn't let me drive around and do a live stream. I tried. But we were able to connect with somebody who is part of the education program at our local landfill. And that was a resource that we provided to our students if they had any questions, that they wanted specific information about what happens in our landfills in Calgary, specifically with plastics. She was a fantastic resource for them and provided lots of statistics and data for them. So this is just a brief video of our local counselor talking to our students about what a good proposal looks like when people come and speak to them at City Council.
Cool, thank you.
We're down to our last few minutes. Councillor Davison, is there anything else you'd like to say to all of these students to help them prepare for next Tuesday's presentations?
You know what? I think, you know, be confident. Number one, you got to be confident in your idea. Be clear with your idea, you know, get to the point, and you know, really iterate why this is a benefit, you know, to the citizens of the city, and not just to you as kind of the idea thinker, but talk a lot about benefit and why it's impactful. But I think, you know, really like clear, concise, and quick are really the things I think of, right? Because like I say, if you got to take 30 minutes to draw me into an idea, you probably either the pitch is bad or the idea is bad. Right? So think about how you get there quickly and get to the benefits, because that's really what people want to know. They want to know how you're going to help me solve a problem. And honestly, like when you think about a pitch, it's always beneficial to the person who's making the pitch. You got to make sure the person you're pitching to understands why it's beneficial to them too, right? And certainly as an elected official, we're always looking for ideas that make us look good too. Right. So, and that's just the art of any pitch, right? So, you know, if you can look good doing something and take other people along with you and make them look and feel good about what they're doing, that goes a long, long way.
So that was actually part of an hour-and-a-half long session that he had with our students. Great resource in terms of them figuring out what do I even do to start this process.
Cool.
Student voice and choice, important element. So for our students, they chose the proposed solution. We gave them very little guidance in that. They would bring ideas to us and ask if it made sense. And we had them convince us that it made sense rather than us validating it for them, because we wanted them to be taking the lead on it a little bit. And they got to choose the format of the presentation as well, but most of them didn't go too creative on that. But some of the proposed solutions were so creative and interesting.
Well, obviously, all of these different factors within the PBL are important, but this one sticks out to me as kind of being my personal number one that I think had the biggest impact on me going through the project, which is the reflection of it. And the idea is that whenever I think of reflecting on something, I think, okay, once you're done and now you've reflected on it and, you know, the train's left the station. But I think the important part of this was, and as Kim and I talked about a lot was, and she mentioned earlier, it's just ongoing. At the end of every class, at the end of every conversation, constantly just reevaluating, reflecting for both for us and for the students. So within Microsoft Teams, we had students just work in a group wiki where they were regularly kind of updating, reflecting on what they've learned, what they're still struggling with, you know, what questions they still have, and what they're doing next. And the great part about that was Kim and I were able to go in there and kind of read their conversations and read where their head's at without being too interruptive. Especially online when students are meeting in their little breakout rooms and we would, pop into a meeting to just be a fly on the wall, it ended up derailing them. It was very challenging. So this, in a way to try to avoid that, this worked really well, as we could just truly be a passive viewer and then, jump in as we need to and course correct as we had to moving on. And the need to know questions that Kim brought up were very important, because not only did, they start with, very baseline questions of why are plastics a problem, or how do plastics get formed, to things way on the other end of how many years does it take a microbe to eat a plastic and break, blah, 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 blah. The need to know questions varied greatly. So they allowed the students to reflect on what they've actually learned. Oh, wow, I didn't know that. And now I'm fairly confident in that. And moving ahead to what's coming up next, to what they need to focus on in order to move ahead and be successful with them. And just to really hammer it home, to be honest with the students, to be very upfront with the students if there's a struggle, if there's, a little speed bump, because they're smart. They can come at us with great ideas that maybe we didn't even think about. So just being quite open with them about the process.
And those need to know questions we do as a whole group, because we really are pushing for our students the concept that sometimes, the best ideas come from 4 or 5 or 6 different people coming together and going down a pathway that leads to this amazing question and this amazing solution. And so we wanted them to have the access to everybody's thinking and everybody's questions. So there was regular formative feedback on student work all the way through. That was a lot easier. Neil kind of touched on, the first year when we were online, some of the challenges we had and how we had to change that format, because us dropping into the meetings, derailed everything. In person, obviously so much easier. Neil and I were able to wander around between the groups, and you can hear the conversations, you can hear how things are going, you can answer questions in the moment. You can tell when things are not going well and give some time for the group to sort it out. And then if you need to, sit down with the group and say, okay, let's start a conversation about how do we make sure that everybody in the group has a voice and everybody has a role. Because sometimes people aren't participating because they just don't know how and what they can offer to the group. So let's talk about that a little bit, and having the opportunity to intervene and have that discussion before we end up with people getting frustrated. Again, so much easier when we're in person, but that opportunity was provided along the way. And then before their official presentations, every group did a full formal run through with us. We gave them lots of feedback, and they had the opportunity to take action with that feedback before their final presentations. And there was no grade attached to that practice run. It was the final product that we were grading. We graded other assessments along the way that was more of the curriculum specific stuff. But when it came to this feedback run, it was totally, we are here to learn. So it took some of the pressure off of that as well. And it made it so that they were much more open to the feedback that we gave.
And just some of the informal conversations having with students after the fact, they all just said that those practice runs were so valuable to them. They just, even just noticing the hiccups that they had presenting, or so-and-so is supposed to read this, but they didn't read that. Just something as simple as that was worth its weight in gold for the students. So we had our very public product for the students, which is the proposal to our Calgary Academy City Council. So the way it worked is, first year it was exclusively online. Everybody called in on Microsoft Teams. And this year we did kind of a modified version of it, because we started online and finished in the building. So we had one classroom with peers and teachers watching. And then we had a solo kind of presentation room for the group that was presenting. And then we had different people from the organization and the Calgary City Council calling in to the call. So it was great, because these students, as soon as they are presenting to somebody other than just their classmates and Kim and myself, it brings it up to a whole new level for them. And we were so impressed with kind of the quality. We were doing this online, and kids are coming in shirt and ties, like getting ready for this presentation and really, really kind of taking it seriously. And I mean, we've all seen student project presentations before, and there's always that kind of sigh of relief from the students afterwards. But this one was a whole different level. Like, it was just They were so pleased with how they did, and they really bought into it. And the students, their peers, are so incredibly supportive of them. So we had our city councilor Jeff Davison, who you saw in the video earlier, and then we were able to get our mayor Naheed Nenshi to call in, briefly speaking to the students ahead of their presentations, which the students didn't know that the mayor was coming in. It was kind of a nice surprise for them. So that was a bit unexpected, but it was very well received for everybody involved.
We even had a student in the chat say, but I'm gonna go get my mom. And the mayor showed up on screen, which is kind of fun. So just gonna play a short clip of the message from the mayor, not the whole thing, just a small bit of it, just because it's so nice to have local members of the community who are from outside of the classroom really supporting the work that we're doing here. So I'll share that with you. I should apologize. I am not great at editing videos. I should have done that up front. I should have apologized. So it's a little bit choppy, but you'll get the message, which is the really important thing here.
And in projects like this, especially in this weird environment, I think teaches you a lot more than about chemistry and about plastics, but really teaches you a lot about collaboration, about communication, about working together with one another. And I think these are skills that are critical, and particularly your skills in problem solving. You know, I find in my life that it is actually so much more rare than I would have thought for people to be able to see a problem, to analyze it, to figure out what the root causes are, to think of different ways to approach it, and to figure out how best to move forward in coming up with a solution. And that's exactly what all of you have been doing. And I think that is amazing. And I hope that you'll be able to use those skills beyond school. You know, I always say that the number one thing that I did when I was in school is I did a lot of debating and public speaking. And you'd think that would be super helpful for me because I do public speaking all day, every day now. But the real reason that it is super helpful for me is that I have the ability to see other people's perspectives, to see debates from both sides. And I think that that is a skill that is really important. And I hope that this project helped you do that as well. The other thing that I was excited about this particular project is that you're actually dealing with a very real world problem. You're dealing with a very serious concern that we have in our community around how we manage our waste. You know, our number one job as a city is to maintain our air, land, and water, to steward that. And often we don't talk about waste and recycling. It just kind of happens. Those bins are just kind of there. But in fact, managing the city's waste in a way that is environmentally sensitive, in a way that is sensitive to climate change, is an incredibly important part of our work as a city. And in fact, the less we talk about it, the more that means that we're actually doing a good job. And this particular issue on plastics in our landfill, on reducing the use of single-use plastics, is an incredibly important thing that is real in my life every day. And I am thrilled that you are actually having these conversations with one another in figuring out what we can do there. So I just wanted to pop in.
So you talk about validating the learning and the hard work that our students had done up to that point. To have the mayor, and the mayor is a little bit of a celebrity here in Calgary, so to have him pop in and tell them that what they're doing is so valuable and matters to him was huge.
And in
so how did they do? Because we want to know, right? Is this actually worthwhile? Did the students actually learn from this? They came up with such a wide range of solutions. We're going to show you a couple of short clips from ones, obviously not the whole thing, but a couple of minutes from two separate ones. So you can see a bit of what they were diving into, but we're talking, you know, education programs, modernizing our current recycling facilities, bringing in whole other programs that don't currently exist in our area, using, you know, enzymatic reactions to reverse some of the processes so that we can get back to usable building blocks and monomers and plastic consuming microbes. It's not even exhaustive, but what's so amazing about this is how much they learn from each other in their presentations as well. And, you know, Neil sort of mentioned at one point how, you know, just the relief that they had after being done this presentation, because they worked so hard on it and put so much into the actual presentation, the energy in the room afterwards too was really neat. You know, the second year we got the chance to actually be in person and debrief with them, and they were talking about each other's ideas, and wow, that was really cool. Like, explain that to me a bit more. It was a bit electric. And I actually, like, when we were standing there watching this happen, I turned to Neil and said, I don't remember any of my unit tests having this kind of impact. They weren't exactly talking excitedly about them afterwards. So that was pretty exciting to see. They all address all of the issues and strengths that came about with their proposals. So they had to recognize that none of these solutions are perfect. They had to recognize multiple perspectives to do that, because what might be an issue for me might be a strength for Neil, and it's important to be able to take other perspectives. And they even, you know, they researched anticipated budgets. That was something that Councillor Davison really said, you know, if you're going to come to me with an idea, I need to know the benefit, but I also need to understand what kind of cost is involved and what kind of timelines there are before we can make any sort of decisions on any of these ideas. So that, you know, it seems like that takes us outside of the curriculum, but actually having to go into that and looking at the budgets and seeing, wow, this is really expensive. Why is this so expensive? That actually got them into that deeper learning of, oh, this is a very expensive process because it requires a lot of energy to heat these things up a lot, or I need special facilities so that my plastic consuming microbes don't just get out into the environment. It got them into a whole other level of understanding, which was really exciting. So this is a bit of an excerpt from one of the projects. This is one that focused on styrofoam use, and they focused more on changing people's behaviors versus chemistry aspects of it. There was lots of chemistry at the beginning where they talked about styrofoam and the monomers and the polymer that exists and all of that kind of stuff. But this is sort of the fun bit that we got into towards the end.
When styrofoam is produced, large amounts over 50 chemicals are released into the ozone and water. That is the largest and most significant impact of styrofoam, because the chemicals that are in polystyrene also seep into the earth and water long after the product has been produced. By long after, I mean 500 years, as that is the estimate on how long styrofoam takes to break down. Polystyrene is also bad for the environment because it breaks down into what is called microplastics. If you have ever picked apart a styrofoam cup or dish that creates a microplastic, that is defined as being less than 5 millimeters long and are harmful to our ocean and aquatic life. Overall, styrofoam is horrible for both humans and our environment. Calgary is not exempt from the issues that the world experiences from styrofoam. Although it is possible to recycle it, it is very expensive to do so, and Calgary simply does not have the facility or capital to be able to recycle it at this time. Therefore, it ends up in our landfills. This is an issue because, as mentioned before, it takes over 500 years to break down. That is 500 years of toxic chemicals being released into the ozone. Not only does that take forever to break down, but styrofoam is also very light, which means it can be easily picked up by the wind and flown out of our landfills.
When we were coming up with our solution, we had a bit of criteria that we wanted to fulfill. One large piece of that criteria was that we wanted to make sure our solution was cost effective and cost a minimal amount to Calgarians and the city of Calgary. We also knew from the beginning that we wanted to target styrofoam as it has severe impacts on the environment. We were successful with our endeavor, and this is what we came up with. We are proposing restrictions upon businesses on the use of styrofoam, and this would include bylaws restricting the use of styrofoam packaging, dishes, and other polystyrene forms. It would also give the city an opportunity to support businesses that could supply alternatives to the styrofoam packaging and create a greener look for our city. This could be done cost effectively through a web page that could provide businesses with alternative packaging suppliers. This option would cost the city of Calgary a minimal amount. However, if the city wanted to, another option would be to subsidize the cost of greener packaging in order to eliminate styrofoam in our businesses and society. This slide is showing an extensive, but definitely not exhaustive list of different alternatives to styrofoam. The most common one that a large portion of companies are reverting to is cardboard, as it is cost effective.
So we paused it there because they're long, but you know, they go on to actually look at different types of packaging that exist and breaking it down cost per item. You know, they found prices online, and then what would the subsidy need to look like if the city wanted to subsidize small businesses so that they weren't so harmed by this sudden change. So again, things that were really amazing for these kids to think about that we didn't necessarily expect them to dive into.
And I remember with this group in particular, that was a big thing that when they started to decide what direction they were going with the project and kind of what ideas they had. One student just said, well, we can't just ask every restaurant in the city to switch to a potentially more expensive container. Like that's obviously going to have a lot of negative feedback. So maybe we need to subsidize it. You guys don't even need me here. Like you just they really get these conversations going, and it's quite impressive. So was it worth it? Short answer, yes. I'll come up with that right out of the gate, is that yes, this was worth it. Both years, I think we had different experiences, both very positive experiences, and both with different learning experiences. The student engagement, it was night and day between how much more into the organic chemistry unit students were versus the other units we covered throughout the year that were more in the classical classroom setting. Just the little differences, and just being able to work through something that turned out to be quite fascinating to them really allowed them to be more into it and build that connection with their community. To think about, Calgary as a city, but then inevitably, like I mentioned earlier, it starts opening them up to, Alberta as a province and Canada as a whole. Just how does this impact everybody on a wider scale? The skills and competencies were huge. I know for myself as a teacher, those were always just a small part of it. It was always just the content. So the focus on those and using those as a vehicle to hammer home the content was very valuable. The group norms was something that we get to right out of the gate with this project with the students, and talking about things like conflict resolution and project management and time management. And, as Kim mentioned earlier, often you have students that aren't working because they don't know what to do, or maybe you have that student who just wants to take control of the whole thing because they've been burned and they just want to make sure it gets done right. And so we tried to dispel with all of that right up front, and really build those conversations and that good atmosphere of positive group norms with students, which is probably something they should get earlier than their last semester of grade 12, but it was nice to kind of be able to work through that. Different strengths and being able to learn from one another. For example, the Styrofoam video that Kim showed you, we had one student in there who was absolutely petrified of public speaking, even online. So that student was the researcher, and that was her role. And she was more than happy to do that and collate all the information. And the other two gentlemen in her group, did the presentation. So just playing to the group's strengths and knowing that different skills are all valuable throughout the process. Now, we did have higher scores on the diploma questions than what we had in previous years. So both years that we've done this, our diploma course, that's our end of year provincial assessment that the province makes for us. So on average, we had 73% success on the organic chemistry questions on the diploma throughout this project, based on 68% previously. Now, as Kim mentioned, we are not researchers. We are not, official test wiseness and assessment researchers, but this is just kind of our anecdotal evidence that we found that, yeah, the students did do better on these questions, and with 6 students scoring a perfect score on these specific organic questions. And it was more fun for us. Selfishly, it was a blast. Like to just walk in there and think, oh, okay, so this 80-minute class, I'm just going to walk around and chat with these kids about their projects and problem solve and troubleshoot and learn where they're at and have great conversations. It was exciting to go into this project for us.
Yeah, and it's not easy. That's an important thing to keep in mind with the was it worth it? It's a lot of work planning this up front. And even, the adaptability you need to have throughout the project. You may go in there thinking this is primarily a work period. I don't have anything specific that I'm going to be teaching them today. And then you find yourself doing a 25-minute conflict resolution discussion with the kids, or oh, you know what, like this has come up. Like the students are naturally at a point right now where they're talking about polymerization reactions. And I wasn't expecting that till tomorrow. We're going to press pause on everything. Let's talk about polymerization reactions now. So being adaptable is really important. So it does help if it's a course that you've taught, at least once before, so you feel a little bit more comfortable doing that. But yes, so much more fun, so much more engaging as teachers. This is a little clip from another totally different solution.
So why are plastics a problem? Plastic waste is a significant problem, both for Calgary and the rest of the world. Being synthetic polymers, plastics generally take an extremely long time to break down in the environment. Additionally, when plastic does eventually start to break down, it can release toxic substances used as additives in its production. These additives can include halogens or heavy metals and can be extremely harmful for the environment. While plastics can be stored in landfills, this takes space and money, and as such isn't the best solution. Additionally, many plastics are produced from compounds derived from fossil fuels, making their disposal as waste the depletion of limited resources. Reducing the amount of plastic used and, when this isn't possible, increasing the portion of plastic that is recycled is essential to dealing with the issue of plastic pollution.
All right, so our plan. We would like to propose a government-funded program to teach our youth about plastics. It would be a program that will gradually increase students' knowledge of plastics over their elementary and junior high years. We have taken grades K to 9 and divided them into 3 divisions, K to 3, 4 to 6, and 7 to 9. Each group will have a set of focus questions that they will focus on those 3 years. These questions will allow students to expand their thinking when it comes to plastics and the hazards that come with them. We will have educators coming into Calgary schools to teach classes 1 period every day for a week. They will encourage students to think about how they dispose of their plastics and what they can do to help. At the end of the week, they will have a field day experience so students can see how much of a problem this environment suffers from. So we've divvied up into our 3 years and we have focus questions for each 3 years. For our K to 3 focus questions, we have why is plastic a problem? Where do our plastics go? What you can do to help and how to properly dispose of our plastics. To teach the young kids how we should be cleaning our plastics and putting them in recycling bins and what they can do to help, even starting at kindergarten.
So this, they go on and they have this spread over 3 divisions, but they even extend this to, they looked at the number of students that are currently in the local school board, and then what would the cost be for the field trips that they wanted to do, and so then what would we need to charge per student, or they even found a grant that they could apply for from the government of Alberta that they might potentially use to be able to run this program. So well thought out. They have a curriculum essentially that they've designed for this program, which was so impressive.
Yeah, that girl you heard speaking at the end of that is now graduated, but going into her first year of her teaching degree. So I think she used this as an excuse to try to play with a lesson plan, which was really fun. So what we did was we had some student reflective feedback, obviously throughout the entire process, but also at the end of the process. So we found that 82% of our students found the experience enjoyable, and 73 of them, so 3/4 of the class, found that it actually increased their engagement and found they were more into the material than they would have been in a regular class or a regular course setup. And a large majority of them, 82% of them, were confident in their understanding covered by the PBL. And I feel, again, this is just anecdotal, but I feel like I could go to some of my students at the end of the electrochemistry unit that I taught in the classical sense and ask them these 3 same questions, and I may not get as high numbers off it. So I think it was very exciting to have kind of that feedback there. And on the right-hand side is a quote from one of our students who often struggles with these types of group projects. And they said, "This was without question the best group experience I've ever been a part of. Everyone pulled their weight, everyone played to their strengths, and we ended up with a great product." So even just that from a student, and they said that to me in the hallway, just in passing. And I thought, wow, I need to write that down immediately, because that's just a quick little succinct way of talking about the positive experience that that student and likely several others had.
Yeah, and there was lots of feedback as well from students in terms of enjoying that they got to actually choose what they were going to focus on with the learning and how they were going to take it, and that really made it so much more engaging for them. So this will be our last video clip. I know we started a little bit late, we maybe went a little over, but I just love this clip because it is, talking about the community building. So this is some of our students you can see in the video there. The bottom left corner is our school principal, Tim Carlson. Our assistant principal is in the bottom middle there. Bottom right is Dr. Greg Bass, who's our president and CEO. He's also the former deputy minister of education in Alberta under a former government. And then top right is Councillor Jeff Davison again. So, for these students to have all of these people here and taking the time to be part of their presentations really, really validates the work that they put into it. And they commented on that afterwards. I had students say, like, Dr. Bass was here the whole time, and they were excited about that. So anyway, I'll play this little clip of Dr. Bass addressing the students.
Thank you, Mr. Ross and Mr. Carlson. Dr. Bass, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Frail. I would be remiss if I didn't say a couple of words too. I'll be brief. I want to thank first and foremost the students for the presentations. I too was very, very impressed. It's really to echo something that Councillor Davison said is you are the future. And we're working really hard to prepare, provide learning opportunities so that you can be thinking differently, because systems that we're accustomed to really are preparing youth for a world that's long since gone by. And so these types of projects and these types of ways of thinking about the challenges of the 21st century, are really the solution, because you will be the leaders of tomorrow. And I just very, very impressed with what you're thinking about and the different types of solutions you come up with, and the difference between the groups. I mean, if you added it all together, synergistically, man, we've got a ton of great ideas there. So I just want to commend all of you, commend you, Mr. Frail. Thanks everybody for taking part. And Councillor Davison, you're a busy man, and for your time to join us here at Calgary Academy and ask such thoughtful questions and provide such thoughtful feedback. It's very much appreciated. Great job, everyone. Thank you.
And I wish we could share some of the feedback that was given to these students, because it was just so amazing. A lot of encouragement of them to not just let this be a school project, lobby your local government with this. These are great ideas. It's just, again, so empowering for our students.
Kim and Neil, there was a question in the chat about how you put your students into groups for this project.
Oh, great question. So Neil, you decided the groups for this one. You want to take that?
Yeah, so it was almost like a wedding seating chart to try to see which groups to put together. I've been fortunate that I've taught these students for the last 2 years. So I taught them grade 11 chemistry, and then I had them in grade 12 chemistry. So I felt I had a pretty solid understanding of some of the strengths and some of the challenges that the students had. So yeah, so I put the groups together, and I actually met with a couple of the other grade 12 teachers. Not the chemistry teachers, but just other ones to okay, do you see any issues with this student and this student working together? I think they would do this very well, and they would do this very well. So yeah, it was an intentional pairing, and we had groups of 3 and 4. We found group 3 was the sweet spot. 4 was getting to be too many, and 2 just wasn't enough. So yeah, just went through and intentionally chose out the groups of 3 based on some of the student strengths. Now, that being said, after we did that, and after we got the ball rolling, inevitably there were some students that just blew me away, that maybe I thought, okay, well, they're not going to be maybe the hardest worker in this, or however you want to word it, but really impressed me. So to what Kim mentioned, but just the students having that opportunity to choose how they did it. It's not that they didn't care what group they were in, but it was such a novel and unique experience for them that I think regardless of what group they were in, they were going to jump in feet first.
And there were some specific things that we did need to keep in mind for some of our students. So for example, one of them is a selective mute. And so we knew that she was not going to be comfortable being part of the presentations. So we needed to make sure that she was with people who were going to understand that and embrace all the strengths that she brought when it came to the science and the research. Those types of things were all taken into consideration as well.
Exactly. That's a good question.
Okay, so challenges, because again, nothing is perfect and nothing is easy. And yes, we had to course correct as we went, because we are learners too, right? You know, until we retire, and you know, we're still learning, and lots of people are still learning well beyond retirement, how to do this better. Definitely challenges involved. We had some of this. We had some of this in person, some of this online, some of it was hybrid learning, where we had kids who weren't comfortable being back in the building, but we were back in the building, and it made it very complex. So we constantly had to adapt to that all the way through. Group work while online, as Neil said, it was tricky for us to support them properly, and that was something that definitely came up as feedback from the students for us, and changed some of the approaches that we took. So that feedback was really helpful. And luckily we got that partway through rather than waiting until the end for it. And I think the big thing that we always need to keep in mind when we're planning these things is students aren't coming to these projects with the skills they need to be successful in these projects. We just have to accept that they aren't there. And one of the main goals of project-based learning is to help build those skills, whatever growth that may look like for each student. Some may already be quite capable in certain areas like communication, and others will see a small amount of success, and that will be huge, right? Seeing somebody who doesn't talk to people actually having conversation with their group mates, for us, is magic. And so recognizing that where that success is for every student is different, but also intentionally building in the opportunity for them to build the skills that you're focusing on. And you probably can't focus on everything at once, right? You may really decide that your focus is on communication skills, because I notice that they're not communicating their understanding very well. And you can create rubrics, or you can find rubrics online where you're focusing specifically on scientific communication, and really support the students along that process, and get them to self-assess so that they're aware of the challenges and the growth that they're having. So that kind of wraps up our grade 12 chemistry PBL. We threw a few more up here on the slide just because we want you to be aware that we've been hard at work doing a lot of these, and they're quite different across the board. Our last couple of years, we've been really trying these out in classes. Teachers aren't expected to do them. They're just giving them a try. So our first one there, for example, the grade 11 biology, we didn't start with the easy win on that one. It was, what's the hardest thing to make engaging for our students? What's the hardest thing for them to learn in this course? And we both agreed it was cellular respiration. And so we targeted that one, and ended up having a really great experience there. The grade 12 math, taking sinusoidal functions and applying that to real world data, that is hard. But the students had so much positive feedback in that. And a lot of the students that were in that project were also part of the Chemistry 31. And, I had the opportunity to be part of both of those projects. And so for me, they did the math one first, then we did the Chemistry 31, the grade 12 chemistry one. And I saw so much growth in terms of how the group work went. Like it was really cool to be part of that and to be able to see it. We've got a grade 10 math one that we looked at percentage price increase and unit pricing. And we looked at it in terms of the differences of cost of food here in Calgary locally. We did some online shopping and compared it to prices in Iqaluit, up in Nunavut in Northern Canada, and just how ridiculous the price difference is. And that one ended with the kids developing a food bank drive for the Iqaluit Food Bank, and sending money up there to try to support them, because they realized just how important it was to support that community when it came to pricing of groceries. And the last one, can we win the battle against cancer? That one took the students well beyond the course of the curriculum. We talked about cancer a little bit in grade 12, and then they extended that into really deepening their understanding of cancer genetics, looking at specific cancer therapies, how they work on a biochemical level, and then, you know, really understanding then where some of the dangers come when they understand the treatments, but also why sometimes treatments work and sometimes they don't. So that one was also a great project. So I guess our take home from that is, if you have any questions about this project, any of those ones that I listed there, you want any resources from us, or you know, just some partial ideas, or honestly, if you want to collaborate on something new, Neil and I are both quite happy to do that. Our email addresses are there and our Twitter handles for those of you that are on Twitter. So the new roles for us as of September 1st are on this slide. So Neil's taken over as the instructional designer, and I'm going to be starting a new blended plus program at my school where they're partially in person and partially at home. So I'm excited for that new design challenge. So if you're interested in that, please reach out. We'd be happy to chat with anybody. And that's it. So thank you. Thank you for joining us today and listening to us share our learning with you.
Thanks, guys.